The summer sun burned over Maplewood Lane, a pristine slice of suburban Virginia where every lawn was a mirror of conformity except one. Marcus Green's front yard was a riot of color and chaos. A sprawling garden of sunflowers, tomatoes, and herbs that spilled over the edges of raised beds, defying the homeowners association's rigid rules. To the HOA, it was a blight. To Marcus, it was a lifeline. At 47, he'd poured his soul into that garden since moving to Maplewood 2 years ago. A black man in a mostly white neighborhood, seeking solace after a life of hard knocks. But today, that solace shattered. Officer Dale Carter, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, stood at Marcus's gate, his starched khaki uniform as stiff as his expression. "Mr. Green," he barked, holding up a citation. "Your property's a mess. We've warned you 3 times. This fine's $500, and if it's not cleaned up by next week, it's $1,000. His voice carried the smug authority of someone who thrived on control. Marcus, wiping sweat from his brow, clenched his fists. "This is my land, Carter. My garden's not hurting anyone." The air between them crackled, a standoff brewing under the noon sun. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, their whispers a low hum. Marcus's garden wasn't just untie-dye, it was a rebellion against Maplewood's unspoken code, blend in or get out. For months, Carter had targeted Marcus, citing minor infractions, from an unapproved mailbox to a non-compliant fence height. But the garden was the real offense. It screamed difference in a place that worshipped sameness. Marcus, a former community organizer who'd fought for fair housing in Baltimore, knew this wasn't just about plants. It was about him, his skin, his history, his refusal to bow. As Carter slapped the citation on the gate, Marcus's teenage daughter, Lila, burst out the front door. "Dad, what's he doing now?" Her voice trembled with fury, her braids swinging as she glared at Carter. "This is harassment." Carter smirked, unfazed. "Take it up with the board, kid." Marcus put a hand on Lila's shoulder, his voice steady but laced with steel. "We'll fight this, Lila. Like always." The citation fluttered in the breeze, a symbol of a deeper war one Marcus hadn't expected to fight in his own front yard. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the citation crumpled beside a glass of iced tea. Lila paced, her phone buzzing with texts from friends who'd seen the confrontation. "They're saying you're causing trouble, Dad. That you're making the neighborhood look bad." Marcus sighed, his eyes tracing the grain of the table. He'd moved here for Lila, for a better school, a quieter life. But the stares, the complaints, the subtle slights they'd followed him. The garden was his refuge, a place where he could grow food, memories, and pride. Each plant told a story, collards from his grandmother's recipes, marigolds for his late wife, Amara. Losing it would be like losing them all over again. The next morning, Marcus found a new notice nailed to his mailbox, a court date. The HOA was escalating, demanding the garden be razed or he'd face eviction. Fury surged through him, but so did resolve. He'd fought bigger battles: redlining, gentrification, systemic neglect. This was personal, but it was also bigger than him. It was about every person told their roots didn't belong. Marcus called his old friend, Jamal, a lawyer who'd battled discriminatory HOAs before. "They want to fight," Marcus said, his voice low. "Let's give them one." Jamal arrived that afternoon, his briefcase stuffed with legal pads and precedent. "They're overreaching, Marcus. HOAs can't just evict you over aesthetics. We'll dig into their bylaws and hit back." As they strategized, Lila snapped photos of the garden, documenting every plant, every bloom. She posted them online with the hashtag #SaveDadsGarden. And by evening, the post had traction. Neighbors, strangers, even activists from across the state chimed in. Support poured in, but so did hate anonymous comments calling Marcus a troublemaker, and worse. The battle lines were drawn. By week's end, Maplewood was a powder keg. The HOA board, led by a steely realtor named Vivian Holt, doubled down, claiming Marcus's garden lowered property values. At a tense community meeting, Vivian stood at a podium, her voice dripping with concern. "We're protecting our community's standards," she said, her eyes flicking to Marcus. "This isn't personal." But the crowd's murmurs told a different story. Some nodded with Vivian. Others, like Mrs. Alvarez, a Latina retiree who'd quietly admired Marcus's tomatoes, spoke up. "That garden feeds his family. What's wrong with that?" The room erupted, voices clashing like swords. Marcus stood, his presence commanding silence. "This isn't just about my garden," he said, his voice steady but burning. "It's about who gets to decide what beauty is, who gets to belong. I'm not tearing it down." Applause mixed with jeers. And Carter, lurking in the back, scribbled notes, his jaw tight. Marcus felt the weight of every eye, every judgment, but he also felt Lila's hand in his, squeezing tight. They were in this together, and they weren't backing down. The days leading to the court date were a blur of preparation and pressure. Marcus and Jamal pored over HOA bylaws, uncovering vague clauses about aesthetic harmony that gave Carter and Vivian unchecked power. "This is a loophole they've weaponized," Jamal said, circling a paragraph. "We'll argue it's discriminatory enforcement." Marcus nodded, but his mind was on the garden. He spent mornings weeding, watering, and whispering to his plants, as if they could hear his resolve. Lila, meanwhile, turned her social media campaign into a movement. Save Dad's Garden trended locally, drawing reporters to Maplewood Lane. The media attention was a double-edged sword. A local news van parked outside Marcus's house, filming his garden while a reporter interviewed neighbors. Some, like Mrs. Alvarez, praised Marcus's community spirit, noting how he shared his harvest with those in need. Others, like Mr. Thompson, a retired banker next door, scoffed. "It's an eyesore. Rules are rules." The reporter, sensing drama, pressed Marcus for a statement. Standing amid his sunflowers, he spoke from the heart. "This garden is my history, my family. It's not a mess, it's a legacy." The clip went viral, amplifying both support and vitriol. Online, the narrative split. Supporters called Marcus a hero, a black man standing against systemic bias. Critics labeled him a defiant outsider, accusing him of ruining Maplewood's charm. Anonymous threats flooded Lila's inbox, some racial, others personal. Marcus wanted to shield her, but Lila was fierce. "They're scared, Dad," she said, eyes blazing. "They want us to shrink. We won't." She organized a rally outside the courthouse, inviting activists, gardeners, and neighbors who believed in justice. The garden was no longer just Marcus Sit was a symbol. The night before the hearing, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through his garden under the stars, touching the leaves of a small, unassuming plant tucked in a Cornera rare heirloom okra, grown from seeds his grandmother had saved decades ago. It wasn't flashy, but it was precious, a link to his ancestors' resilience. He wondered if it would survive the fight. At dawn, he found Lila in the kitchen, designing protest signs. "We're not just fighting for the garden, are we?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "We're fighting for us." The courthouse was a circus. Protesters chanted outside, holding signs that read, "Let it grow," and "Justice for Marcus." Counter-protesters, egged on by Vivian's allies, shouted about property rights. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Marcus sat beside Jamal, his suit pressed but his hands calloused from gardening. Vivian and Carter sat across the aisle, their lawyer, a slick man named Gregson, radiating confidence. The judge, a stern woman named Evelyn Harper, called the room to order. "Let's keep this civil," she warned, her gaze sweeping over the packed gallery. Gregson opened with a barrage, painting Marcus as a rule-breaker who flouted community standards. He projected photos of the garden, zooming in on tangled vines and uneven beds. "This chaos disrupts Maplewood's value," he argued. "Mr. Green was warned repeatedly," Jamal countered, presenting evidence of selective enforcement. "The HOA has ignored similar violations by white residents," he said, showing photos of a neighbor's cluttered porch and another's faded paint, both unpunished. "This is about race, not rules." Marcus testified next, his voice steady but raw. He spoke of the gardens meaning his wife's marigolds, his daughter's love for fresh tomatoes, the okra tying him to his roots. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I'm here to live, to grow, to belong." The gallery murmured. Some moved, others skeptical. Vivian, testifying for the HOA, insisted it was about fairness. "We can't let one person undermine our community," she said, her tone polished but cold. The judge listened, her face unreadable. As the first day ended, Marcus felt the weight of uncertainty. Jamal was optimistic, but the HOA's lawyer had swayed some spectators with talk of standards. Outside, Lila's rally grew louder, drawing more supporters. A young white couple from down the street, the Harrisons, joined, holding a sign that read, "Gardens Unite Us." Marcus hugged them, surprised by their support. But Carter lingered nearby, whispering to Vivian, his eyes locked on Marcus. The fight was far from over, and Marcus knew the HOA had more tricks up its sleeve. The courtroom's second day crackled with anticipation. Marcus arrived early, his stomach knotted but his resolve unshaken. Lila sat behind him, her eyes scanning the crowd for allies. The gallery was packed activists, neighbors, even a few curious strangers drawn by the viral story. Jamal had spent the night digging deeper, uncovering emails between Vivian and Carter that hinted at a vendetta. "They've been planning this for months," he whispered to Marcus. "We'll expose them." Gregson, the HOA's lawyer, doubled down, calling witnesses to paint Marcus as a troublemaker. Mr. Thompson, the banker, took the stand, griping about declining property values and how Marcus's garden scared buyers. Jamal cross-examined, pressing Thompson to admit he'd never complained about other messy yards. Thompson stammered, his credibility fraying. Next, Carter testified, his voice dripping with authority. "Mr. Green's defiance threatens our community's order," he said. Jamal pounced, presenting the emails. "Isn't it true you targeted Mr. Green after he challenged your authority at a board meeting?" Carter's face reddened, but he denied it. The room buzzed as Jamal called Mrs. Alvarez to the stand. She spoke warmly of Marcus, describing how he'd shared vegetables with her family when they struggled. "He's a good neighbor," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't about rules, it's about hate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vivian shifted in her seat, her composure cracking. Judge Harper's eyes narrowed, her pen pausing over her notes. Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but he knew the HOA wasn't done fighting. Then came the bombshell. Jamal introduced a new angle, the garden's environmental impact. He called an expert, Dr. Lena Brooks, a botanist who'd studied Marcus's garden after seeing Lila's posts. This garden is a haven for pollinators, she testified. It supports bees, butterflies, and soil health in ways manicured lawns can't. She presented data showing how Marcus's plants boosted local biodiversity. The HOA's obsession with neatness, she argued, harmed the ecosystem. The gallery murmured, some nodding, others skeptical. Gregson scoffed, calling it irrelevant. But Judge Harper leaned forward, intrigued. Marcus took the stand again, this time to share a personal story. He spoke of his grandmother, a sharecropper who'd taught him to garden as a boy. She grew okra in fields owned by people who saw her as less. He said, his voice thick. That okra in my yard, it's her legacy. It's my daughter's future. He pointed to the photos of his garden, lingering on the small okra plant. Tear it down, and you tear down my history. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Even Gregson seemed momentarily unsettled. Outside, the rally swelled. Lila had organized a plant-in, where supporters brought seedlings to plant along the courthouse lawn. News cameras captured the scene, showing a diverse crowd: black, white, Latino, young, old, united for Marcus. The hashtag #SaveDadsGarden trended nationally, with activists linking it to broader issues of racial justice and environmental equity. But the HOA fought back, leaking a doctored photo of Marcus's garden, making it look overrun with weeds. Social media erupted, and Marcus's supporters scrambled to counter the smear. That night, Marcus and Lila sat on their porch, the garden glowing under moonlight. What if we lose, Dad? Lila asked, her voice small. Marcus pulled her close. Then we keep fighting, baby. For the garden. For us. For everyone who's been told they don't belong. He looked at the okra plant, its leaves swaying gently. It was more than a plant, it was a symbol of survival. A quiet rebellion against a world that tried to uproot him. He didn't know it yet, but that plant held a secret that would change everything. As the trial's third day loomed, Jamal uncovered a new lead, a rare designation for Marcus's okra. Dr. Brooks had identified it as a protected heirloom variety, registered with a national seed bank for its cultural and historical significance. If we can prove this, Jamal said, his eyes gleaming, the HOA's case collapses. They can't touch a protected plant. Marcus's heart raced. The fight was no longer just about his rights, it was about history, about roots deeper than any HOA could dig up. The stage was set for a showdown that would shake Maplewood to its core. The courtroom hummed with tension as the trial's third day began. Marcus sat straighter, his eyes fixed on Judge Harper, who'd begun to show flickers of skepticism toward the HOA's case. Jamal was ready to strike, clutching documents that could turn the tide. The gallery was a sea of faces: supporters, detractors, and reporters scribbling furiously. Outside, Lila's plant-in had grown, with dozens of seedlings dotting the courthouse lawn, a living testament to Marcus's fight. The air felt electric, as if the truth was about to burst free. Jamal called Dr. Brooks back to the stand. She held up a certificate from the National Seed Bank, her voice steady but passionate. Mr. Green's okra is a rare heirloom variety, Amara's pride, named after his late wife and registered for its cultural significance. It's protected under federal agricultural heritage laws. She explained how the okra, grown from seeds passed down through Marcus's family, was one of only a few surviving strains from African-American sharecroppers. Destroying it would erase a piece of history. The gallery gasped, and even Judge Harper leaned forward, her pen still. Gregson scrambled to object. This is irrelevant to HOA regulations, he argued, but his voice lacked its earlier swagger. Jamal countered, presenting the federal law that protected registered heirloom plants from local ordinances. The HOA's demand to remove Mr. Green's garden violates this statute, he said. They're targeting a cultural treasure. Vivian's face paled, and Carter shifted uncomfortably, his clipboard now a useless shield. The room buzzed as reporters typed furiously, sensing a turning point. Marcus took the stand, his voice raw with emotion. He described finding the okra seeds in his grandmother's old tin box after her death, how he'd planted them to honor her and Amara. This plant isn't just mine, he said, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. It's a link to people who survived slavery, segregation, and worse. It's proof we're still here. His words landed like a thunderclap, silencing the gallery. A woman in the back wiped tears, while others nodded, their skepticism softening. Even Judge Harper's stern face softened, her gaze lingering on Marcus. Gregson tried to claw back control, calling Vivian to testify again. She doubled down, claiming the HOA's rules applied equally to all. We're not targeting anyone, she insisted, but her voice wavered under Jamal's cross-examination. He produced records showing the HOA had overlooked violations by white residents, like overgrown hedges and unapproved sheds. Why single out Mr. Green? Jamal pressed. Vivian stammered, her polished facade cracking. The gallery murmured, sensing her hypocrisy. As the day ended, Judge Harper called a recess to review the evidence. Marcus stepped outside, where Lila's rally had grown into a festival of solidarity. Supporters sang, planted more seedlings, and shared stories of their own fights against discrimination. Mrs. Alvarez brought a basket of Marcus's tomatoes, passing them out to the crowd. The Harrisons, the young couple, joined hands with Lila, their sign now reading, "Roots Run Deep." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude, but also fear. The HOA wasn't done, and he knew they'd fight dirty. That night, a brick crashed through Marcus's window, shattering the quiet. A note tied to it read, "Leave or lose more." Lila screamed, and Marcus pulled her close, his heart pounding. He called the police, but the officer who arrested a friend of Carter's dismissed it as kids playing pranks. Marcus knew better. The HOA's allies were escalating, desperate to intimidate him. He boarded up the window, his hands shaking, but his resolve hardened. They won't break us, he told Lila, though his voice trembled. By morning, the story of the brick had spread, fueling outrage. Lila's hashtag exploded, with national activists calling for an investigation into the HOA's tactics. Jamal filed a motion to introduce the brick as evidence of harassment, arguing it showed the HOA's true motives. The courtroom buzzed as the fourth day began, with Judge Harper's face unreadable but her tone sharp. I want answers, she said, glaring at Vivian and Carter. Marcus gripped Lila's hand, feeling the weight of history in his corner, ready to face whatever came next. The trial's fourth day dawned with a storm brewing both in the sky and in the courtroom. Dark clouds hung over Maplewood, mirroring the tension inside. Marcus arrived with Jamal, their faces set with determination. The gallery was packed to capacity, with standing room only for latecomers. Reporters lined the back, their cameras trained on the players in this unfolding drama. Lila sat in the front row, her protest sign leaning against her chair, its bold letters reading, "Justice Grows." The brick incident had shifted the narrative, casting a spotlight on the HOA's tactics. Jamal opened with a bold move, presenting the brick and its threatening note as evidence. This isn't about aesthetics, he argued, holding up the note for the gallery to see. It's about intimidation, rooted in prejudice. He called a forensic expert who linked the brick's paint to a hardware store where Carter had been seen days earlier. The gallery gasped, and Carter's face turned ashen. Gregson objected, calling it circumstantial, but Judge Harper allowed it, her eyes narrowing. "I'm listening, Mr. Jackson," she said to Jamal, her tone signaling she was done with games. Vivian took the stand, her confidence shaken. She denied any knowledge of the brick, but Jamal pressed her on the HOA's pattern of targeting Marcus. "You've sent him 6 citations in 2 years, while ignoring similar violations by others," he said, presenting a spreadsheet of unpunished infractions. Vivian's responses grew curt, her eyes darting to Carter for support. The gallery sensed blood in the water, their murmurs growing louder. Marcus watched, his heart pounding, as the HOA's facade began to crumble. Then came a surprise witness, Sarah Harrison, the young neighbor who'd joined Lila's rally. She testified about overhearing Carter and Vivian at a coffee shop, plotting to make an example of Marcus. "They said his garden was a black thing that didn't belong," Sarah said, her voice trembling but clear. The courtroom erupted, and Judge Harper banged her gavel. Gregson tried to discredit Sarah, calling her biased, but her sincerity resonated. Mrs. Alvarez, sitting nearby, nodded fiercely, her own testimony echoing in the room. Marcus felt the tide turning, but the HOA wasn't finished. Gregson called a final witness, a real estate appraiser who claimed Marcus's garden had cost Maplewood $50,000 in property values. The number was inflated, and Jamal dismantled it on cross-examination, showing the appraiser's ties to Vivian's realty firm. The gallery jeered, and Judge Harper's patience visibly thinned. She called a brief recess, leaving Marcus to wonder if the Ochra's legal protection would be enough to tip the scales. Outside, the rain began to fall, soaking Lila's plant in but not dampening its spirit. Supporters huddled under tents, sharing stories of their own battles with HOAs, landlords, and systemic bias. A national news outlet picked up the story, framing it as a fight for cultural heritage. Marcus joined the crowd briefly, thanking them, his voice hoarse. "This is bigger than me," he said, rain streaking his face. "It's about all of us." Lila hugged him, her eyes fierce with pride. "We're winning, Dad," she whispered. Back in court, Jamal made his closing argument, weaving the threads of discrimination, environmental justice, and cultural heritage. "Mr. Green's garden isn't a mess, it's a monument," he said. The HOA's actions are a thinly veiled attack on his identity. He held up the seed bank certificate, emphasizing the Ochra's protected status. Gregson's closing was weaker, leaning on tired arguments about community standards. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the endgame. As Judge Harper prepared to deliberate, she looked at Marcus, her eyes softer than before. "I'll have my ruling tomorrow," she said, dismissing the court. Marcus stepped into the ring, Lila at his side, feeling the weight of the fight but also its purpose. The garden, the Ochra, the community, they were all on the line. Tomorrow would decide everything, and Marcus was ready, his roots too deep to be uprooted now. The final day of the trial broke with a clear sky, as if the storm had washed away doubt. Marcus woke early, tending his garden one last time before heading to court. He knelt by the Ochra, its leaves vibrant despite the chaos. "Hold on," he whispered, as if it could hear him. Lila joined him, her phone buzzing with messages of support. Save Dad's Garden had gone global, with petitions circulating online. The weight of the moment pressed on Marcus, but so did the strength of those standing with him. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, every seat filled, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Harper entered, her face solemn but resolute. Marcus gripped Lila's hand, his heart racing as Jamal gave him a steady nod. Vivian and Carter sat stiffly, their earlier confidence replaced by unease. The gallery fell silent as Harper began. "This case is about more than a garden," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "It's about fairness, heritage, and the law." She addressed the HOA's claims first, dismantling their argument about property values. "The evidence shows selective enforcement," she said, citing Jamal's records. Mr. Green's garden was singled out, while similar violations were ignored. The gallery murmured, and Vivian's face tightened. Harper then turned to the okra, holding up the seed bank certificate. "This plant, Amara's pride, is protected under federal law. The HOA's demand to remove it is not only discriminatory, but illegal." Gasps rippled through the room, and Lila squeezed Marcus's hand. Harper wasn't done. She referenced the brick incident, her tone sharp. "The evidence suggests harassment, possibly coordinated. I'm referring this to the district attorney for investigation." Carter's clipboard clattered to the floor, his face pale. Vivian stared straight ahead, her hands clenched. The judge concluded, "The HOA's case is dismissed. Mr. Green's garden stands, and the fines are nullified." The gallery erupted in cheers, and Marcus exhaled, tears stinging his eyes. Lila hugged him, sobbing with relief. Outside, the celebration was electric. Supporters danced, planting more seedlings in the courthouse lawn. News cameras captured Marcus embracing Mrs. Alvarez, the Harrisons, and others who'd stood by him. Lila live-streamed the moment, her voice cracking with joy. "We did it," she shouted, the crowd echoing her. But Marcus knew the victory was bittersweet. The HOA's defeat didn't erase the threats, the stares, or the brick through his window. The fight for belonging was far from over. That evening, Marcus hosted a barbecue in his garden, inviting supporters and neighbors. Mrs. Alvarez brought empanadas. The Harrisons shared homemade lemonade. And even Mr. Thompson showed up, sheepish but curious. They ate under strings of lights, the garden glowing with life. Marcus shared his harvest tomatoes, collards, and Oakreach dish a story of resilience. Lila raised a glass, her voice steady. "To roots that won't be pulled," she said. The crowd toasted, their laughter mingling with the crickets. But the HOA's shadow lingered. Carter resigned quietly, and Vivian faced scrutiny as the DA opened an investigation. Anonymous threats continued, though less frequent. Marcus installed security cameras, refusing to let fear take root. He and Lila planned a community garden project, using his yard as a model to teach others. The okra, now a symbol of victory, stood tall, its pods ready for harvest. Marcus felt Amara's presence in every leaf, guiding him forward. The garden had won, but Marcus knew the deeper fight for justice, for equity, for a place to call home would continue. He looked at Lila, her eyes bright with purpose, and felt hope. They'd face the storm and come out stronger, their roots entwined with a community that refused to let them fall. The weeks after the trial were a whirlwind. Marcus's garden became a local landmark, drawing visitors who wanted to see Amara's pride and hear the story of the man who'd stood up to the HOA. Lila turned her social media campaign into a platform, sharing gardening tips and stories of resilience. Save Dad's Garden evolved into Grow Your Roots, inspiring community gardens across Virginia. Marcus, once a quiet newcomer, was now a reluctant hero, his story a beacon for those fighting similar battles. But the victory wasn't without scars. The brick incident had shaken Marcus. And though the DA's investigation into Carter and Vivian was ongoing, no arrests had been made. Maplewood's tensions simmered. Some neighbors warmed to Marcus, while others kept their distance, their lawns still pristine symbols of conformity. Mr. Thompson, the banker, stopped by one day with a hesitant apology. "I was wrong about you," he said, eyeing the okra. Marcus nodded, offering him a tomato. "Plant something," he said. "It changes you." Marcus threw himself into the community garden project, partnering with Mrs. Alvarez and the Harrisons. They secured a vacant lot from the city, transforming it into a patchwork of raised beds. Kids from Lila's school joined, planting sunflowers and beans, their laughter filling the air. Marcus taught them about heirloom seeds, sharing stories of his grandmother and Amara. "Every plant's a story," he told them, handing out okra seeds. "Grow yours with pride." The kids listened, wide-eyed, their hands dirty with hope. Lila, now a senior, channeled her energy into activism. She spoke at city council meetings, advocating for laws to protect urban gardens and curb HOA overreach. Her passion drew attention from colleges, and scholarship offers poured in. Marcus watched her bloom, his heart swelling with pride but also worry. The threats hadn't stopped. Interrela late-night calls, anonymous emails. He upgraded their security, but the fear lingered, a reminder that some battles never fully end. One evening, Dr. Brooks visited, bringing news. The National Seed Bank wanted to feature Marcus's okra in a traveling exhibit on African American agricultural heritage. "Your garden's a bridge to the past," she said, her eyes bright. Marcus agreed, donating seeds but keeping some for his own plot. The exhibit would spread his story nationwide, linking it to others who'd preserved their roots against the odds. It felt like a small victory in a larger war. The community garden's grand opening was a celebration of defiance and unity. Hundreds came, planting, eating, and sharing stories. Mrs. Alvarez led a salsa-making workshop, using Marcus's tomatoes. The Harrisons organized a kids' art contest, with drawings of sunflowers and okra covering the lot's fence. Lila emceed, her voice confident as she dedicated the garden to everyone who's been told they don't belong. Marcus watched, his chest tight with emotion, knowing Amara would have smiled. Yet, as the crowd dispersed, Marcus spotted a familiar figure: Carter, standing across the street, his face unreadable. Their eyes met, and Carter turned away, disappearing into the dusk. Marcus felt a chill but shook it off. He'd faced worse than Carter's resentment. The garden, the community, Lila, they were his strength. He knelt by the okra, its pods heavy with seeds, and whispered, "We made it." The plants seemed to nod, their leaves catching the last light of day. The fight had changed Marcus, but it had also changed Maplewood. Neighbors who'd once whispered now waved, some even planting their own gardens. The HOA, under new leadership, revised its bylaws, loosening restrictions. Marcus knew it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He looked at the okra, its roots deep in the soil, and saw a future where everyone could grow, free from fear. A year later, Marcus's garden was more than a yard, it was a movement. The community garden thrived, its beds bursting with vegetables and flowers, tended by a diverse crew of neighbors, students, and activists. Maplewood Lane had changed, its lawns now dotted with small gardens, each a quiet rebellion against the old conformity. Marcus walked the lot daily, mentoring young gardeners, his hands still calloused but his heart lighter. Lila, now a freshman at Howard University, called every night, her voice buzzing with ideas for expanding Grow Your Roots. The DA's investigation had yielded results. Carter faced charges for vandalism, and Vivian resigned from the HOA, her realty business faltering under public scrutiny. The threats had dwindled, replaced by letters of support from across the country. Marcus framed one from a Mississippi farmer who'd saved the same okra strain. Their shared history a bond across miles. The National Seed Bank exhibit, featuring Amara's pride, drew crowds, each visitor carrying home a seed and a story. One spring morning, Marcus hosted a planting day, the community garden alive with laughter. Mrs. Alvarez taught kids to make empanadas, while the Harrisons led a composting workshop. Mr. Thompson, now a regular, showed off his fledgling tomato plants, grinning sheepishly. Marcus looked around, seeing faces of every color, age, and background, united by soil and hope. He thought of Amara, her love for growing things, and felt her spirit in the breeze. Lila surprised him, driving down from college with a group of classmates. They brought seedlings and a banner reading, "Roots Run Deep." She hugged Marcus, her eyes shining. "You did this, Dad," she said. He shook his head. "We did this." They planted together, the okra taking center stage, its pods a symbol of survival. As the sun set, Marcus spoke to the crowd, his voice steady but warm. "This garden's more than plants. It's proof we can grow through hate, through fear, through anything." The event ended with music, food, and stories. A young girl, no older than 10, tugged Marcus's sleeve, holding up an okra pod. "Can I plant this?" she asked. Marcus knelt, handing her a trowel. "Plant it deep," he said. "Let it grow strong." She nodded, her small hands digging into the earth, and Marcus saw his grandmother, Amara, Lila, all the women who'd shaped him in her determined face. As night fell, Marcus stood alone in his garden, the stars bright above. The okra swayed, its leaves whispering of battles won and those yet to come. He'd faced a system that tried to uproot him, but he'd held fast, his roots too deep to break. The garden wasn't just his, it belonged to everyone who'd fought for a place to grow. He touched the soil, feeling its warmth, and smiled. "We're still here," he said, his voice carrying into the night. Maplewood would never be perfect, but it was changing, one seed at a time. Marcus knew the fight for justice wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Lila, the community, and the okra's quiet strength, he'd keep planting, keep growing, keep fighting. The garden was his legacy, and it would bloom for generations, a testament to roots that refused to be pulled.